History tells us slavery ended in 1865, but some historians argue the story didn't end there. By the end of this film, you'll see why some historians believe slavery didn't disappear after the Civil War. It evolved into something else. For generations, Americans were taught a simple story. Abraham Lincoln fought the Civil War to free the slaves. For decades, school books told generations of Americans that the Civil War began as a moral crusade to end slavery. Yet the deeper truth behind the war is far more complex, rooted in politics, power, and a nation struggling to stay together. By 1860, the United States stood dangerously divided, with southern states threatening to leave the Union entirely. In the winter of 1860, one southern state after another began leaving the United States, convinced their future no longer existed within the Union. Within weeks, entire states declared they were no longer part of the United States, forming a new government known as the Confederate States. As the country fractured, a newly elected president faced a crisis unlike any in American history. Yet contrary to what many Americans believe today, Abraham Lincoln did not begin the Civil War with the primary goal of ending slavery. In fact, Lincoln openly stated that his first duty as president was not to destroy slavery, but to preserve the United States. In a letter written during the Civil War, the president explained what he believed the war was truly about. He wrote, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, not either to save or destroy slavery." Which raises a question many Americans have never been asked. If the war did not begin to end slavery, what actually started it? Long before the Civil War, America was already built on a contradiction. A nation fighting for freedom while millions lived in slavery. During the American Revolution, thousands of black men took up arms, fighting in a war that promised liberty, yet rarely delivered it. Some fought for the colonies, believing freedom might follow victory. Others joined the British, who promised liberty in exchange for service. In 1775, a British governor issued a proclamation promising freedom to enslaved men who joined the British Army. For many enslaved men, the war offered a dangerous chance at freedom. Escape the plantation and fight for the side promising liberty. Thousands accepted the offer, leaving plantations and farms behind to join British forces in exchange for the promise of freedom. Others fought alongside the colonial army, believing that victory might finally bring the freedom promised in the words of the Revolution. Yet when the war ended, the freedom many had fought for still remained out of reach for millions across the new nation. Decades passed, yet the contradiction remained. A nation founded on liberty, still divided by slavery. By the 1860s, the United States stood on the brink of collapse. A nation divided over the future of slavery. One by one, southern states began leaving the Union, declaring they would form a new nation of their own. Within months, the divide grew deeper. The United States was no longer a united country. In April 1861, the tension finally erupted. The first shots of the Civil War were fired. What began as a political crisis quickly became the deadliest war in American history. At first, the war was fought to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. But as the war dragged on, the question of slavery became impossible for the nation to ignore. As the war continued and casualties mounted on both sides, the question of slavery grew impossible for the nation's leaders to ignore. By 1862, the war had grown so brutal and costly that leaders in Washington began considering a dramatic new strategy. In September of 1862, a decision was announced that would change the meaning of the war and the future of millions. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that enslaved people in rebellious states were now legally free. Across the country, word slowly spread that the war had taken on a new meaning. In towns and plantations across the South, rumors began spreading that something in the war had suddenly changed. Across fields and towns, the news traveled slowly, whispered from person to person that freedom might finally be coming. As the war continued, thousands of formerly enslaved men made a decision that would change the battlefield forever. Soon, thousands of black soldiers were officially recruited into the Union Army, transforming the war into a fight for freedom. By the later years of the war, nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors were serving in Union forces across the country. Across battlefields from Virginia to Tennessee, these soldiers fought with determination in a war that would redefine the nation. After 4 long years of destruction and sacrifice, the Civil War was finally approaching its end. In April of 1865, the Confederate Army finally surrendered, bringing the bloodiest conflict in American history to an end. The war was over, but the nation it left behind was scarred, divided, and forever changed. More than 600,000 lives had been lost, making the Civil War the deadliest conflict the United States had ever faced. When the fighting stopped in 1865, nearly 4 million enslaved people across the United States were finally declared free. For the first time in American history, millions who had lived in bondage were now stepping into an uncertain but newly free future. The Civil War had preserved the United States, but the deeper struggle over equality and justice was far from over. Over the years, the story of the Civil War would be told in many different ways, shaping how generations understood their past. But history is rarely simple, and the deeper truths of the past often reveal stories far more complex than we were taught. Slavery had ended in 1865, but one small clause in the law would quietly shape the future that followed. The amendment abolished slavery, except as punishment for a crime, a single sentence that would carry enormous consequences. Under these laws, people could be arrested for vague offenses like vagrancy, unemployment, or simply not carrying proof of work. Many of those arrested were then sent into prison labor camps, where they were forced to work in mines, farms, and railroads. In many places, prisoners were leased to private companies, forced to work in mines, farms, and railroads for little or no pay. Historians would later describe this system as a new form of forced labor that replaced slavery in many parts of the country. Slavery was abolished in 1865, yet new systems of laws, arrests, and prison labor soon followed, giving forced labor another name. Today, the Civil War is remembered as the moment slavery ended, but its consequences shaped the nation for decades afterward.